Do you guys like to read? Have you read The Count of Monte Cristo? The great French novel by Alexandre Dumas, where a man sits in prison contemplating revenge with no hope. And he finds a fortune and is eventually released, but the torture kind of drives him mad and he becomes evil. That's really not the case in a situation that has happened in the U.S., which I wanted to talk about next on Jinka Jabo. Now, I'm talking about the West Memphis Three. I'm talking about the three teenagers who were convicted of murder in 1994. So it's been an old case, and actually the last news I had heard of it was in 2011 when the boys got released, when the third in a series of documentaries showed them at the end. The film was not meant to show them escaping because they didn't know, or escaping, I mean being released, because they didn't know. But the film, it was a series of three documentaries called Paradise Lost. And I saw the first two back in 2009 when I was living in Korea, and it's the story of how three children were brutally murdered and hogtied and left in a ditch in West Memphis, Arkansas. And after a shoddy investigation, they couldn't really identify anyone or find evidence. The bodies were, apart from being hogtied, were decayed, and animals had roughed them up and eaten parts of them and bitten them. But I mean, none of that was admitted in the first trial. It was meant to be sort of the last big rush of the Satanic Panic, where they targeted three teenage boys, very poor boys, living in a trailer home, living in a trailer park together. All three of them had lived in this trailer park at one time or another. Of the three teenagers, there was a mentally disabled boy, and the police caught him and associated him with two other boys, Jesse and Damien Echols. And the boy that they caught, he had a very low IQ. He was legally mentally disabled, but they threatened him and pressured him and told him that he had failed the polygraph test and all this, and got him to craft a very unlikely, impossible scenario where Damien and Jesse, these two alternative, Metallica-loving, weird kids, he devised this whole made-up story, exactly what the police wanted to hear, about these boys hog-tying the children and doing it for satanic rituals and raping them and doing horrible things to the bodies. Because of the media attention and Satanic Panic frenzy, it was later, I imagined Satanic Panic was like in the 80s or something, but this was sort of a leftover of that, and happening in rural, well, not rural, but I mean poor southern America. A lot of it flyover America, or at the edge of that. So Damien Echols, who is now iconic, became he was said to be the leader of it, and he was proven to have paraphernalia, journals that had pentagrams and stuff on it, and he listened to Metallica and quoted Shakespeare and stuff, and he was a smart kid, but from a very poor background. Looking at his past, I learned that he was very poor, in fact even much poorer than my family. There were times when he didn't have even running water, which I find just amazing, and it's proof that there is there is a lack of privilege, there is a lack of support in many parts of America that we tend to forget. But he took the stand, and he firmly believed in his heart that if he were good, that since he was completely innocent, that he wouldn't have to lie about anything. Like, he could just say exactly who he was. He admitted to being a Wiccan. He admitted to his interest in rock music. He admitted to his association with his accuser and with the friend he was accused alongside. He firmly believed that he would not get in trouble for it because, he had been harassed by the police before, hunted, singled out because of how strange he looked. And as he later revealed in an interview, which is based on a book that he wrote, which I'm dying to read now, he was so used to dealing with the police that he didn't think it was going to be what it became. But he was convicted of murder, the murder of 3 children, and they showed him receiving his death sentence. And there's something really perverse that I enjoy about seeing convicted criminals get their death sentence, because they all respond a bit differently. You've got your Ted Bundys that kind of shrug, but then in his case, he just looks so stoic. It was like his mind, everything emptied, like the reality is completely lost for him. And the other 2 were sentenced to lifetimes in prison. And so this caught the attention of some filmmaker, documentary maker for HBO, who made the film Paradise Lost, which became a big hit, and which there was a sequel, Paradise Lost 2. And when I discovered the first film, I learned that the second one had just been made, and this was back in 2010. And I watched the second film, and I was so disappointed because the kids were still in jail. But by that point, it had attracted a lot of attention, and it was one of the first big internet movements where it got everybody onto a web page, and all these people from all around the country were gathering together both to investigate the case and to raise money for lawyers and everything. And eventually even Eddie Vedder and Johnny Depp and a bunch of celebrities got involved with this, and the Dixie Chicks, I think, at some point. Just really big names, especially at the time. And so that just made it makes the story even more strange. But it wasn't like these people jumped on board and he was suddenly released, or that he had any feeling that he would ever get released, or these 3 would ever get released. And as he talks about in an interview later on, he spent 10 years on death row, 10 years without seeing sunlight. Without sunlight. 10 years where at random the people he was sharing death row with, they would, it seemed at random they would get taken away and given lethal injections. And he had no idea when his turn would come, and he had no idea when anyone else's turn would come. And so he would develop relationships with his cellmates and talk to them quite a bit, and then they'd die. Like he would lose them forever. And he didn't know when he would be next, but at least he had some hope. He would exchange thousands of letters. He got married via just sending paper letters. He met someone who flew from New York to West Memphis, to Arkansas, to fight for his case. And in the end, at the very end of the third film, he gets released. But they ask him what got him through it, and he says that at one point he learned that he could either keep improving himself in the off chance that maybe he would be released, or he would let it just continue to destroy him, just like he had seen others go through on death row. And he decided to use it as self-improvement, and he got involved in Rinzai Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, and he would meditate and develop himself, and that was his only release. That was the only thing he had. But in doing that, he was able to maintain his psyche and to learn to love and forgive even the people that put him there, even his worst accusers. There are emotional times in the film series where there is an emotional letter that he writes to one of the fathers of the children that was killed, who initially was pointing the finger at Damien, and okay. I'm getting way too into this, but I just encourage everyone to take a look at this series, and the point I'm trying to get at is that unlike Count of Monte Cristo, which, being fiction, he emerges and tries taking revenge, but revenge doesn't help him, and he sees with pain in his cell. Like, this is the story of a man who was wrongly accused, and he spent most of his life, I guess, or he was on death row for 10 years, and still he learned to forgive and accept everyone around him, and I think that's just a really moving story. And it's sort of I love true crime, but I love especially the stories that have these sorts of endings or these sorts of resolutions. Of course, Damien's story is far from over. He's living in Salem, Massachusetts right now, which is an appropriate place for him. But I am also reminded of Norman Mailer's The Executioner's Song, where was it Gary Gilmore, I want to say? I don't know if I'm remembering that name correctly, but he was a convict who fully admitted to his guilt and accepted what was going to happen to him in his famous last words, which later became morphed into the Nike slogan where, let's get this over with, just kill me, just do it, right? Even in the worst of conditions, you find people just learning to forgive and find beauty and kindness. And stories like that, as horrifying as they are, to consider the victims and to consider the resources and the heartache and the pain and the suffering that never really goes away for many of the people involved. Even looking in cases like that, you can still see the human spirit at work, and you can still see the love of God at work, and I'm really amazed by all that. So before I go on to any other current events or make you guys listen to Finnegan's Wake again, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the West Memphis 3, and I hope that you look into it for yourself, because it's really an amazing story. Peace.